Some towns don't fade away, they just stop updating. While the rest of America kept speeding forward, rebuilding, rebranding, and refreshing every decade, a few places quietly held their ground. No big resets, no identity crisis, just the same streets, same buildings, and the same way of life that somehow still works. These aren't theme parks or tourist traps pretending to be vintage. These are real towns where time didn't cooperate or wasn't invited to. And the strangest part? People still live here, work here, and choose this version of life on purpose. So let's step into 15 U.S. towns where the 1960s never really ended. 15. Berlin, Maryland. Berlin doesn't look like it remembers the 1960s. It looks like it refused to leave. You roll into town and suddenly everything slows down like someone hit a hidden switch. No glass towers, no aggressive neon, just a clean, old-school main street where the buildings still hold their shape, their color, and somehow their attitude. And here's the part that messes with your head. It's not staged. Berlin has been used in movies like Runaway Bride, but when the cameras leave, nothing changes. Same storefronts, same antique signs, same rhythm. It's like Hollywood showed up, took notes, and left quietly. Population sits around 5,000, which means you're not just visiting, you're being noticed. Median home price? Roughly $320,000. Not dirt cheap, but you're paying for something most towns lost decades ago: identity. Crime rate is low, walkability is high, and small businesses still run the show. No corporate takeover, no copy-paste franchises on every corner. Now let's be honest, this kind of charm comes with trade-offs. Job options, limited, nightlife. If you count ice cream at 8 p.m., you're thriving. And if your personality requires constant stimulation, Berlin will humble you real fast. But if you're the type who notices details, the way a barber still takes his time, the way shop owners actually talk to you instead of scanning you, this place hits different. Picture this. You step out of a quiet cafe, coffee in hand, sunlight bouncing off brick buildings that haven't needed updating since Kennedy was in office. No rush, no noise, just a town that decided, quietly and confidently, that it was already good enough. And honestly, that might be the boldest move on this entire list. 14. Mackinac Island, Michigan. Mackinac Island didn't just slow down, it cut the cord completely. No cars, none. Not for tourists, not for locals, not even as a compromise. This isn't a vibe, it's a rule that's been in place since 1898, and they've never looked back. You get around by horse, bike, or your own 2 feet. That's it. Which means traffic jams here involve carriages, and the loudest engine is a set of hooves hitting pavement. It sounds charming, and it is, but it also forces everyone to live at a pace most Americans forgot existed. The town itself looks like a perfectly preserved mid-century resort. Bright storefronts, old signage, fudge shops that still make everything by hand, and a downtown strip that hasn't been swallowed by chains. No Starbucks, no McDonald's, just independent businesses that somehow survived the modernization wave. Population sits around 500 year-round, but summer turns it into a controlled chaos of tourists. Median home price around $500,000 and climbing. You're not paying for space, you're paying for the experience of living somewhere that actively rejects convenience. And that's the catch. Everything here is harder. Groceries come in by boat. Winters are quiet to the point of isolation. There's no quick trip anywhere, no late-night drive, no escape from the rhythm of the island. You either adapt or you don't last. Jobs are almost entirely tourism-based. Hotels, restaurants, carriage driving. Crime is nearly non-existent, mostly because anonymity doesn't exist either. Everyone knows who you are, what you do, and probably where you were 5 minutes ago. Mackinac isn't pretending to be the past. It made a decision a long time ago, and unlike most places, it actually stuck with it. 13. Havana, Illinois. Havana isn't trying to look vintage, it just never got the memo to upgrade. This is a Mississippi River town where time didn't pause dramatically. It just kept moving slower and slower until everything settled somewhere around 1965 and stayed there. Downtown is straight out of an old postcard, brick buildings, faded signage, a movie theater that still feels like it should be showing double features for $1. No polished, historic district branding, no curated charm. It's real, a little worn, and that's exactly why it works. Population sits around 3,000. Median home price, roughly $110,000. That's not a typo. That's what happens when a town doesn't chase trends. Cost of living is about 20 to 25% below the national average, which means you can actually breathe financially without selling your soul to rent. The economy runs on the basics: healthcare, education, agriculture, and river-related work. Nothing flashy, nothing fast-growing, but steady. Crime is slightly below national average, and the pace of life is slow enough that most problems don't escalate. They just get talked about at the same diner the next morning. But here's the honest part. There's not much to do in the modern sense. No nightlife, no big shopping centers, no constant stimulation. If you need entertainment every hour, Havana will feel like a waiting room. What it offers instead is consistency. Same streets, same routines, same people showing up every day. It's not trying to impress you. It's just existing, exactly as it has for decades. And weirdly, that's what makes it feel stable in a world that changes every 5 minutes. 12. Mount Dora, Florida. Mount Dora feels like Florida before everything got loud, crowded, and a little chaotic. No massive highways cutting through downtown, no wall of condos blocking the view. Just a clean, walkable town that somehow dodged the full force of modern development. The first thing you notice is how intentional everything feels. Tree-lined streets, antique shops that aren't pretending, cafes that still prioritize conversation over speed. It's not frozen by accident. Mount Dora actively leaned into staying this way. Population is around 16,000, but it never feels that big. Median home price sits near $375,000, which is surprisingly reasonable for a Florida town that hasn't been overrun. Cost of living is moderate and crime rates are low, especially compared to bigger Florida cities. The economy here is built around tourism, local retail, and events, and Mount Dora loves an event. Art festivals, craft fairs, antique shows. The calendar is packed, but in a way that feels community-driven, not corporate-sponsored. Now, the trade-off. If you're expecting fast growth, big career moves, or a high-energy environment, this isn't your place. The job market is stable but limited, and the town moves at its own pace whether you like it or not. Also, Florida heat doesn't take a day off. Summer here feels like walking through warm air that refuses to move. You either adapt or you complain daily. But Mount Dora's strength is balance. It gives you that nostalgic, slower lifestyle without completely cutting you off from reality. You're not isolated. You're just not rushed. And in Florida, that's rare. 11. Bristol, Rhode Island. Bristol doesn't just remember the past, it organizes it, schedules it, and then repeats it every year like clockwork. This is a town where tradition isn't a suggestion, it's infrastructure. You don't stumble into nostalgia here, you follow it. Let's start with the obvious. Bristol hosts the oldest continuous 4th of July celebration in the United States, running since 1785. And no, it's not just a parade, it's a full-scale takeover of the town's identity. Streets painted with red, white, and blue center lines. Flags everywhere, not decorative, permanent. This place doesn't celebrate history once a year. It lives inside it. Population sits around 22,000, but the pace feels smaller. Median home price hovers near $450,000, which is the cost of living inside a postcard. Crime rate? Low, like leave your door unlocked and nothing happens, low. Job market is steady. Healthcare, education, small business, and marine-related work, because, of course, boats matter here. Downtown is clean, structured, and almost too perfect. Brick storefronts, old diners, family-run businesses that haven't needed a rebrand since the Kennedy era. No chaotic overdevelopment, no corporate clutter pushing everything out. It feels preserved, but not fragile. Now, here's the catch. Bristol has a personality, and you either fit it or you don't. This is not a come as you are and reshape the town kind of place. It's more like, this is how we do things. Adjust accordingly. Social life revolves around community events, local traditions, and people who've been here long enough to remember when nothing needed explaining. And if you're looking for speed, you're in the wrong zip code. Things move when they move, not when you want them to. Bristol isn't stuck in the past by accident. It made a decision a long time ago. Keep what works, ignore the rest. And it's been doubling down on that ever since. 10. Galena, Illinois. Galena feels like someone hit pause on development right before everything started looking the same. While most towns tore down their old buildings to modernize, Galena did the opposite. It kept almost everything. And now it looks like a version of America that barely exists anymore. About 85% of the town is part of a historic district, which means what you see today is almost exactly what people saw decades ago. No glass replacements, no aggressive redesigns, no attempt to make it look new. The buildings are original, the streets are intact, and the atmosphere doesn't feel recreated. It feels uninterrupted. Population is around 3,200, but it pulls in a steady flow of visitors year-round. Median home price sits near $260,000, which is surprisingly reasonable considering you're living inside one of the best-preserved towns in the Midwest. Cost of living is manageable, crime is low, and the town is quiet in a way that feels controlled, not empty. Economically, Galena leans heavily on tourism, small businesses, and local services. You'll find boutique shops, family-owned restaurants, and historic inns. But almost no big chains. That's not by accident. There's a clear resistance to anything that disrupts the look and feel of the town. But here's the trade-off. Growth is limited by design. Job opportunities aren't expanding rapidly, and if you're chasing career acceleration, Galena won't keep up with you. It's not built for that. What it offers instead is consistency, walkable streets, predictable routines, a town that knows exactly what it is and has no interest in becoming something else. Galena didn't fall behind modern America. It stepped aside and let it pass. 9. Saugatuck, Michigan. Saugatuck isn't frozen in the past the way some towns are. It's more calculated than that. This is what happens when a place keeps its 1960s charm, but quietly upgrades just enough to stay desirable. It didn't reject the future, it curated it. Set along Lake Michigan, Saugatuck looks like a mid-century beach town that never got replaced by high-rises, pastel storefronts, hand-painted signs, small cafes with actual personality, not the copy-paste kind. The downtown is compact, walkable, and built around the idea that you don't need more space, just better space. Population is under 1,000 full-time residents, which explains why everything feels personal. But during summer, that number multiplies fast. Tourists show up for the beaches, the art scene, and the slower pace, then realize this place runs on its own rules. Median home price? Around $550,000. And that's not even the high end. Lakefront properties go way beyond that. Rent is limited and often seasonal, which makes long-term living harder than it looks. Crime rate is extremely low, and the town is clean to the point where it almost feels managed. The local economy revolves around tourism, hospitality, and the arts. Galleries, boutique hotels, independent restaurants, no big box dominance. But that also means job options are narrow unless you're in service, creative work, or remote employment. Here's the reality most people miss. Saugatuck is calm until it isn't. Summer crowds pack the streets, parking disappears, and that peaceful vibe turns into controlled chaos. Then fall hits, and the town exhales again. It's not stuck in time, it's selective. Saugatuck kept the parts of the past that people are willing to pay for and quietly priced the rest out. 8. Mount Airy, North Carolina. Mount Airy doesn't just resemble the 1960s, it became the blueprint for how people remember it. This is the real-life inspiration behind the Andy Griffith Show, and unlike most places tied to TV nostalgia, it didn't fade when the credits rolled. Downtown looks like it was preserved on purpose. Floyd's Barbershop still operates. Snappy Lunch still serves food like nothing changed. You'll even see patrol cars modeled after the old Mayberry Squad car, not as a gimmick, as part of the identity. It's less themed town and more, this is just how things stayed. Population sits just under 10,000, but tourism brings in over 300,000 visitors a year. That's a huge ratio, and it tells you everything. People aren't coming for excitement, they're coming for familiarity. Median home price is around $175,000, making it one of the more affordable towns on this list. Cost of living is low, crime rates are below national averages, and the town feels safe in a way that doesn't need advertising. Economically, Mount Airy runs on small businesses, tourism, and local services. No rapid expansion, no tech boom, no sudden spikes, just steady movement. Unemployment hovers around average levels, and most jobs are tied to keeping the town running, not reinventing it. Now, here's the trade-off. If you're looking for variety, you'll notice the limits quickly. Restaurants close early. Sundays are quiet. Entertainment options don't rotate much. And if you rely on fast internet or fast services, you might feel like you're working against the town's pace. Mount Airy didn't evolve past the 1960s. It became a living version of it. And once you're in it, you either appreciate that consistency or you start noticing how little actually changes. 7. Abilene, Kansas. Abilene doesn't try to impress you. It assumes you'll figure it out eventually. This is the kind of town where nothing feels rushed, nothing feels redesigned, and somehow nothing feels broken either. It's the hometown of Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that influences everywhere without being loud about it. You've got the Eisenhower Presidential Library, old rail lines, and a downtown that still looks like it was built to last instead of trend. No glassy upgrades, no modern overlays, just original storefronts doing their job decade after decade. Population is around 6,400, which is just enough to keep things running, but small enough that routines matter. Median home price sits near $160,000. Cost of living is roughly 25% below the national average, which means people here aren't constantly chasing higher income just to survive. Crime rate is low, and the biggest problem you'll hear about is weather. Kansas doesn't do seasons, it does surprises. The economy is simple but stable. Agriculture, education, healthcare, and a steady stream of historical tourism. Jobs aren't flashy, but they're consistent. You're not going to get rich fast here, but you're also not going to burn out trying. Now here's the part that separates Abilene from other nostalgic towns. It doesn't feel curated. There's no effort to preserve a vibe. It just never left. The same shops, the same routines, the same social structure where people know each other without trying, but that consistency comes with limits. Career growth is slow. Options are narrow. And if you need variety, Abilene can start to feel repetitive fast. Still, there's a reason places like this survive while others collapse. They don't chase change, they outlast it. 6. Woodstock, New York. Woodstock is what happens when the 1960s didn't end. They just got better marketing. This town didn't freeze in time like the others. It evolved, but only in one direction, deeper into its own identity. First, the myth. The famous 1969 Woodstock Music Festival didn't even happen here. It took place in Bethel, about 2 hours away. But Woodstock absorbed the entire cultural impact anyway and turned it into a lifestyle that never expired. Downtown feels like a permanent counterculture loop. Independent bookstores, record shops, art galleries, and yes, more crystal shops than practical stores. Population is around 6,000, but it feels like a rotating cast of artists, musicians, and people who decided corporate life wasn't worth it. Median home price is pushing $550,000 plus, and cost of living sits well above the national average. That's the irony. A town built on rejecting mainstream success has become expensive to live in. Crime rate is low, mostly because the biggest conflicts here involve opinions, not actions. The economy revolves around tourism, arts, and small-scale entrepreneurship. You'll find yoga studios, handmade goods, live music venues, and niche businesses that wouldn't survive anywhere else, but thrive here because the audience exists. Here's the reality check. Woodstock is not practical. Groceries are expensive, jobs are limited unless you fit the culture, and everyday living costs more than you expect. You're paying for atmosphere, not efficiency. And unlike other towns on this list, Woodstock doesn't feel stuck. It feels intentional. This isn't a place that forgot to move forward. It just chose a different direction and never looked back. 5. Silverton, Colorado. Silverton feels less like a town and more like something that survived by staying out of the way. Tucked deep in the San Juan Mountains at over 9,300 feet, it's physically hard to reach. And that isolation is exactly why it still looks the way it does. There's one main road in, one way out. And during winter, even that feels optional. No big chains, no modern strip malls, just a tight grid of old buildings that haven't been replaced because, frankly, no one bothered. Main Street still runs on wood facades, small storefronts, and businesses that feel like they've been handed down instead of redesigned. population sits under 700. That's not small, that's microscopic. Median home price is around $330,000, which is surprisingly reasonable considering you're surrounded by mountains that look like a desktop wallpaper. Crime is nearly non-existent. Not because of heavy policing, but because there's nowhere to disappear to. The economy is seasonal and honest about it. Tourism drives everything, especially the historic Durango and Silverton narrow-gauge railroad that still drops people right into town like it's 1962. In winter, it's snow, quiet, and locals figuring things out until the next wave arrives. Now here's the reality most people underestimate. Living at this altitude isn't just a vibe, and it's a limitation. Your car struggles, your body notices, your phone signal disappears exactly when you need it. Convenience doesn't exist here in the modern sense, but that's the trade. Silverton doesn't try to compete with cities. It removes itself from the comparison entirely. Nothing moves fast here. Not the economy, not the people, not even time. And that's exactly why it still feels untouched. 4. Wall, South Dakota. Wall shouldn't work. On paper, it makes no sense. A town of about 700 people in the middle of nowhere, built around a single roadside attraction. And yet somehow, it's one of the most recognizable stops in the entire country. Everything here revolves around Wall Drug. Not a neighborhood, not a district, one place. What started as a small pharmacy turned into a sprawling complex of shops, restaurants, souvenirs, and whatever else they decided to add over time. It's part Old West set, part 1960s roadside stop, part controlled chaos. And the reason it works? Marketing. For decades, they flooded highways with billboards promising free ice water and cheap coffee. Hundreds of miles out, you start seeing the signs. By the time you arrive, you've already bought in. The town itself reflects that same frozen moment. Old signage, classic storefronts, nothing redesigned for modern aesthetics. It looks like the interstate boom era never ended. Because here, it didn't. Median home price sits around $160,000. Cost of living is below the national average. Rent can be $600 to $800 if you can even find a place. Crime rate is low, largely because the entire town is built around tourism and visibility. Jobs? Retail, tourism, some ranching, that's about it. If Wall Drug slows down, the town feels it immediately. Now the honest part, living here means living inside a concept. Your environment doesn't change much, your routine revolves around the same place, and privacy is limited because everything is public-facing. Wall isn't preserved for history, it's preserved because it still works, exactly the way it did decades ago. 3. Mineral Point, Wisconsin. Mineral Point doesn't feel preserved. It feels protected, like the town collectively decided decades ago that change was optional, and then actually followed through. While other places modernized and lost their identity, Mineral Point doubled down on keeping it. This is one of the earliest communities in the U.S. to take historic preservation seriously, starting back in the 1960s before it became trendy. The result? Limestone buildings, narrow streets, and storefronts that haven't been redesigned to chase attention. They just exist. Solid, consistent, and quietly confident. Population is around 2,500, which keeps everything tight-knit without feeling empty. Median home price sits near $240,000, making it surprisingly accessible for a town that looks this intact. Cost of living is below the national average, crime is extremely low, and the pace of life is steady enough that nothing feels rushed or forced. The economy leans on tourism, local crafts, and small businesses, but not in a commercialized way. This place has deep roots in Cornish mining history, and that influence still shows up everywhere, from traditional food like pasties to community events that don't feel staged for outsiders. What makes Mineral Point different is its consistency. No big box stores pushing in, no sudden development spikes, no attempt to refresh the look. Even the art scene here feels grounded. Studios, pottery, and handmade goods that reflect the town instead of trying to reinvent it. But that same stability comes with limitations. Job opportunities are limited, growth is slow, and if you're used to constant variety, you'll notice the repetition quickly. This isn't a place for rapid change. It's a place for staying put. And that's the point. Mineral Point didn't get stuck in the past. It chose a version of life that worked and never saw a reason to replace it. 2. Bisbee, Arizona. Bisbee is what happens when a town refuses to follow any timeline, past, present, or future. It started as a copper mining hub, but when the industry collapsed in the 1970s, instead of fading out like most mining towns, it flipped direction completely. Artists moved in, then musicians, then people who didn't fit anywhere else. And somehow, instead of chaos, it formed its own version of order. One that still feels like the 1960s, just kept evolving without ever ending. Set in the Mule Mountains, Bisbee is built on steep hills, narrow roads, and buildings that seem to lean into each other like they're sharing secrets. Nothing about the layout is convenient. Parking is a challenge. Walking involves stairs, and the entire town feels like it was designed before anyone considered efficiency. Population is around 5,000, but it feels smaller because of how spread out and layered everything is. Median home price sits near $250,000, which is relatively affordable considering how unique the place is. Rent averages around $800 to $1,000, depending on whether your place comes with quirks, and most do. The economy revolves around tourism, arts, and remote work. There's no major industry driving growth, no corporate presence reshaping the town. Just small businesses, galleries, cafes, and a steady flow of visitors trying to figure out what exactly this place is. Crime is low, but Bisbee's real challenge isn't safety, it's structure. Things don't always run smoothly, schedules are flexible, and if you need predictability, this town will test you. Bisbee isn't frozen in time. It just stopped following the same rules as everyone else and never went back. 1. Hermann, Missouri. Hermann doesn't feel like it got left behind. It feels like it opted out. While most towns chase growth, expansion, and whatever trend came next, Hermann quietly held its ground and said, "This works. We're keeping it." Sitting along the Missouri River, this town was built by German immigrants in the 1800s, and unlike most places, it never diluted that identity. You still see it everywhere. Brick buildings, family-run wineries, traditional festivals, and a downtown that looks like it skipped the last few decades entirely. Population is around 2,400, but the town pulls in a steady flow of visitors year-round, especially during Oktoberfest. And here's the difference. It doesn't feel commercialized. The wineries aren't corporate chains, the shops aren't mass-produced concepts, and the events still feel like they belong to the town, not the tourists. Median home price sits near $230,000, which is relatively reasonable for a place this well preserved. Cost of living is below the national average, crime is low, and daily life runs at a pace that hasn't been disrupted by modern urgency. The economy revolves around tourism, agriculture, and local business. Wine production is a major driver here, and it's been that way for generations. No sudden pivots, no tech boom, no reinvention cycle, just steady continuity. Now here's the part most people overlook. Hermann isn't frozen because it couldn't change. It's frozen because it didn't need to. There's a difference. The systems still work, the community still functions, and the town hasn't faced the kind of pressure that forces transformation. But that also means limitations. Job opportunities are narrow, growth is slow, and if you're looking for variety or fast-paced opportunity, you won't find it here. Hermann isn't trying to impress you. It's showing you what happens when a place finds its identity early and never lets it go.